أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أرواحنا له فداء. أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون صدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Juma Mubarak. Inshallah, we will continue our discussion on Tarbiyah al-Islamiyya, Islamic upbringing, Islamic development and cultivation. Our discussions are around the two ahadith, one by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the other by Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, wherein they explain the different stages of development. The Prophet's hadith comes from the perspective, perhaps of the child that for 7 years they are Sayyid al-Bayt, that they are the ones who are, in a sense, the rulers or masters of the house, although that does not mean that we let them rule or we just leave them in chaos without any boundaries. As we explained before, that we provide for them a good atmosphere, Islamic atmosphere. We provide for them guidance, but not directly, perhaps a more indirect manner of providing for them guidance through play and allowing them to discover things on their own. So that perspective from the child is that they are Sayyid al-Bayt at one moment, then they are Abdul Bayt, they are those who are commanded, who are in servitude, and then also that third stage, they are Wazir, they are the ministers, or you could say the secretary of the home. Again, they are taking the consultation as a Wazir would do. And Imam Sadiq's hadith is perhaps more from the perspective of the parent or the wali, the guardian, as we mentioned, whereas the Imam, he says, احمل سبيك حتى يأتي عليه ستة. So carry your children or cherish them for 6 years, and then you train them fil kitab, in the book or by the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for 6 years, and then ضمه إليك, and then you bring them close to you, you companion them for 7 years. So in either case, what we understand from these two riwayat is that there are stages of development. And these stages perhaps coincide with those stages of development that we mentioned in our last lecture, from birth to 2 years old, where the child is developing their sensor motor skills and exploration with their eye-hand coordination, their smell, their taste, all of these things. And from the next stage of development, from 3 to 5, where they begin to make associations, they begin to acquire a logical knowledge and association between sounds and things, between perhaps smells and things, perhaps even different expressions that they see on the face of their parents, even what they hear in the tone of their voice. They begin to make these logical associations. The next stage of development would be from 6 to 8, so where they're coming out of that stage of being the Sayyid al-Bayt, or being that child that they are being cherished, and now coming into that stage where the parent or the wali, the guardian, must begin to train them. Adibhum fi kitabillah, as Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam, he states. So we see that in these stages of development, there are two things which are perhaps developing if we examine them very closely. On one hand, the physical body of the child is developing, growing. So the child is developing physically and mentally. As we mentioned before, certain tasks that the child will accomplish needs both of these things. It needs sometimes physical readiness and also mental readiness. And understanding this, one of the things I want to address today is this idea and this concept of physical and mental readiness. As we think about this idea and this concept of Tarbiyah al-Islamiyya, because there may be challenges. And quite often in our communities, we do not speak about these challenges openly. Sometimes folks try to shy away from them or hide them. But no, there are challenges. Sometimes physical challenges that our children have to deal with. At times, mental or learning challenges that they have to deal with. And understanding this, we need to reflect what our objective is with regards to Tarbiyat al-Islamiyya. And the objective, as we mentioned in the very first day, is that we want to steer our children, our generation, despite whatever challenges that they may have, the physical challenges or the learning challenges. We want to try to guide them towards that mission of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he stated that إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. What we hear quite a bit of, that the objective of the Prophet was to cultivate and instill the best of ethics, the best of akhlaq. So when we are in this Tarbiyat al-Islamiyya, yes, we want to try to reach all of those milestones physically, even mentally, with our children. We want them to reach those milestones. But if we run into challenges because of disability, because of some sort of disorder, then we need to know how to deal with that, because it will affect sometimes the transition from one stage to the next. It will sometimes affect, learning, the learning ability of the child. It may also affect the way the child interacts. And it can be something as simple as, let's say, dyslexia, that the child, when they read a text, it appears backwards to them. It could be simple as that. It could be something more complex, as a loss of vision, and so they may not be able to see the text well. So how do we cope with this, or how do we deal with this, or respond, which is a better term, how do we respond to these disabilities in this stages of Tarbiyat al-Islamiyya? Quite often when we look at how we deal with this, or how folks deal with this, initially they may be shocked that their child may have some sort of disability. Some will go into denial that, no, this does not exist. Some will have become depressed. And some will have regression or go back to this state that, okay, well, as if the child was not there. And this happens quite often, that, oh, well, they are put away and tucked away as if they're not part of a community. Some guardians or parents, they may become angry. They may begin to question themselves personally. And in fact, the worst of things is that sometimes people within the community will begin to question the parents of that child, that, oh, well, what did they do in order to have such a child? And this is a negative and a wrong approach to understanding and responding to these disabilities. After all of these kind of responses, you do have occasions where simply accept it. And sometimes the parents or guardians may go through all of these emotions which I mentioned, that, from shock to denial to depression and anger, and then finally they will accept it. And this is what is ideal. And I want to speak about this, the acceptance of these challenges and the acceptance of these disabilities that may exist in our children or even in next generation, and what is our responsibility in that regard. Because we will move forward speaking about these different milestones in the Tarbiyah al-Islamiyya, but at least I want to address this at this moment so that we would have at least fulfilled our responsibility in bringing awareness to these disabilities. And it is not a point of shame if we truly understand the perspective from Islam, that what is the status of such folks and such individuals. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He only gives us what we can bear. La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha. And this will be on both sides, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not put a great burden on the parents and guardians of that child. They should be able to bear it. In other words, they will need to come into this fold of acceptance. And in order to come into that fold of acceptance, they need to understand the status of their children. And likewise, if that child, in the, you could say, the extreme scenario where that child may not have taklif, they might not understand, have the understanding and the aptitude to bear the taklif, the responsibilities, let's say, of prayer, or fasting, or making hajj. How do we create an environment for them where also they are accepting of that environment, they are comfortable within that environment, and the folks in that environment also accept them? So the first thing we need to understand is that if they're not achieving these milestones and these stages of development, which we've outlined so far, and we will continue to outline in our series on Tarbiyah al-Islamiyya, if they not reached them at the same speed or same level, the 6 years, and then 7, or 7 years, 7 years, and 7 years, what we need to understand is that their development is something which will be gradual. We have to create an environment or a setting that they will gradually develop and gradually meet certain milestones. So as we create this program for them, or we are guiding them gradually, it has to be stable as well. So gradual, stable, needs to be continuous. It needs to be cumulative. Instead of saying that, from birth to the age of 7, that they are Sayyidul Bayt, or we are cherishing them, we're not putting any pressure on them, we're not educating them. And then the next 7, we begin to teach them from the Quran. Perhaps in those 7 years, they are not able to do that because of some sort of disability, some learning curve that they may have, or they may have, in some sense, we could say Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, any of these, you could say, disabilities that affect their ability to achieve those milestones at those particular ages. So what we need to do, we work with them on a gradual and a continuous basis. And so we look at their overall progression, their overall development, which is the cumulative development. And so what we do, we plant a seed, we nourish that seed, and we sustain it. And as they are developing, and as they are growing mentally and physically, what we would call in the Islamic concept as rushd, then that child that you say that, okay, maybe at the age of 7 or maybe at the age of 8, they should have achieved this. As we mentioned, one example of being able to ride a horse. Okay, maybe they will achieve it at the age of 20. That's fine. As long as we kept their program gradually and we kept them in a stable environment, we kept them with a stable program, and it was continuous. Mashallah, alhamdulillah, I'm fortunate to have the experience growing up actually in high school. Actually in junior high and in my first couple of years of high school, to have volunteered with the Special Olympics. And I worked with, you could say, young adults at that time who were also in junior high and high school. They had different disabilities, sometimes physical disabilities, sometimes learning disabilities. And it is not as if they cannot achieve things. Yes, they achieved. They were achievers, but how you work with them, how you help them to help themselves was very important. I learned this in high school, in junior high, and eventually at one point, even in my adult life, I worked with at a group home for, you can say, adults with disabilities, learning disabilities. And it was a very fruitful type of job. That these are individuals, some with Down syndromes, some with other learning issues, or some with brain injuries that was caused by an accident. And it was not as if they could not do things for themselves. No, they were able to do things for themselves. But keeping them in on a program, a continuous program, a program that gradually brought about more independence for them, was very fruitful for them, and it worked. So those milestones that we want to achieve for our children as well. As Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi hafidhahullah, he points out one of these milestones just so that we can see that the child is coming out of that stage where they're being cherished, that stage where they're being left as the Sayyid al-Bayt. We're not creating too many boundaries for them, but rather we are guiding them indirectly. Now they're coming into that stage where we are training them, we're educating them by the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're beginning to learn things about responsibility. We see that Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi hafidhahullah, he explains or gives an example of this stage, where he states that إِذَا بَلَغَ الْغُلَامِ ثَمَانِ سَنِينَ فجائز أمره في ماله وقد وجب عليه الفرائض والحدود وإذا تم الجارية 7 سنين فكذلك. The Imam, he states that when a boy, he reaches to the age of 8, he's pointing out one of these milestones in stages of development, and this is in that second stage. He says that his affairs, or what he is commanding with regards to his own money, well, is jaiz. He's able to spend his money. He's able to do what he wants with his money. And likewise, the Imam, he says, and it becomes obligatory upon him to perform his duties. And likewise, if there is any hudud or repercussions from certain actions that he does, then those are applicable upon him. And this hadith needs a bit of explanation. On one hand, the child at the age of 8, young boy at the age of 8, being able to use his money and spend his money. Of course, the latter part of this hadith, which I'll go ahead and explain at this time as well. وَإِذَا تَمَّ الْجَارِيَةِ, and if a girl, your daughter, reaches the age of 7, then she has the same rights as well. Meaning that she's able to spend her money at that age. The obligations become wajib upon her, and the hudud, or punishments, also become wajib. What the Imam, alayhi salatu wasalam, he's pointing out on the one hand, is the responsibility that a parent is teaching their children, teaching them, again, the value of money, the value of taking on responsibilities. And so when the Imam also says it is wajib upon them, the fara'id, we know that the child, in this case the boy, at the age of 8, or even the girl at the age of 7, they have not come into this, what we can consider to be rushd al-jismi. They have not become baligh. They have not become physically mature, meaning that they may not have had come into the age of puberty. So what this wujub is here that the Imam is explaining is something that is recommended. That at this age, when it comes to the prayers and the fasting and these type of things, these are the things that you're educating your children about. You're preparing them ahead of time so that when they become baligh, when they reach the age of puberty, that they have this habit of performing their duties. They have the habit of taking upon their shoulders certain responsibilities. And of course, it will be gradual. The times of old are certainly different from our own days, where children at a very young age, they actually had more responsibility in some sense with regards to family, with regards to I would say even working on the land and farming, these type of things, whereas our time is a little bit different. And so these have to be adjusted according to the times as well, as far as what responsibilities you're giving those children. But nonetheless, the idea is that you're preparing them before they reach the age of puberty, before they reach puberty, to take on responsibilities. So this is why he mentions that their obligation and duties is to do that. So this is just an example of one of the milestones. The child who reaches these milestones would be called Rashid or Rashida. Quite often we understand the concept and the idea of Rashid and Rashida only in a single term. However, the ulama in their books, they write about the concept of Rashid and Rashida in much more detail, whereas they explain that there are different levels of rushd, different categories of development. Physical development, or rushd, whereby we call also balugh, that the child has reached the age of puberty. And then we have what they explain as mental or intellectual maturity, which quite often is just referred to as Rashid. But as well, we have the ulama speaking about what is called Rashidat al-Maliyya or Rushd al-Mali, the responsibility that a child would have, the financial responsibility and know-how in order to conduct their affairs. This is also another type of rushd that is explained in some of the books of fiqh and some of the books of our ulama in a bit more detail. The opposite of this maturity or this development that the child may undergo is the concept of being safi or da'if. Safi meaning having some sort of, you could say, mental or intellectual challenge. Da'if would carry the same meaning, but also can denote other types of disabilities as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks about this in the Quran. So when it comes to Tarbiyah al-Islamiyya and developing our children and providing them with the appropriate atmosphere, even the Quran speaks about this. It's often overlooked in these particular terms or in this context. Nonetheless, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 282, in verse 282, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's speaking about, from the very beginning of the verse, about a person who's entering into a contract, entering into a loan, that someone should be charged with writing down the loan and making sure that that agreement is witnessed by others Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states, فَإِنْ كَانَ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِ الْحَقُّ سَفِيهًا أَوْ ضَعِيفًا أَوْ لَا يَسْتَطِيعُ أَن يُمِلَّ هُوَ فَلْيُمْلِلْ وَلِيُّهُ بِالْعَدْلِ. He says that, so if the debtor, that person who owes something, is someone who is safi, meaning does not have the intellectual aptitude, according to some translations, although I don't like this particular translation, but simply to make you understand that they're feeble-minded. In other words, they don't have full understanding of the transaction. So if someone does not have the mental capacity to understand the full scope and the depth of that transaction, or they are weak, or they are unable to dictate, in other words, they're not able to bring the scribe forward to write down for them the transaction. So if they're not able to do that, then let the guardian dictate justly. In other words, the guardian acts on behalf of that person who is safi or da'if. And one thing that we learn from this is that the person with that, you could say, challenge, that physical challenge, or maybe even mental or intellectual challenge, they're not barred from interacting within society. No, they are a part of the society. They are socially active, according to this verse. There's certain things that they're not able to do on their own. There's certain things that they may not understand the full scope of the matter, or be able to fully engage in that matter. So therefore, their guardian does it on their behalf. Their guardian helps them or assists them in that particular transaction. So this is one of the things that, even from many Muslim families, when I've gone out to visit different communities, some folks who have children who are have learning disabilities, sometimes physical disabilities, sometimes mental disabilities, from various spectrums. As I said, the more extreme spectrum would be a severe case of Down syndromes, where the child cannot really interact as other children interact. I've had parents to ask that, what is your responsibility? What is their duty? They felt shy with bringing their children around. Unfortunately, this thought process has entered into the minds of others. But when we look at the example that we find in the Quran, then we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He shows that such folks have a place within society. And that is the guardian's responsibility and duty to also create that atmosphere for them, that they are understanding, I would say at the very least, that they are human, at the very least, that they are loved and cherished within that society, and that they can do things within the society. That they're not someone that should be hidden away from others. MashaAllah. So one of the things that we also come across with regards to understanding how to accept the child, or accept these individuals that have disabilities or have challenges, physical or mental challenges. If we compare the benefit, yes, I would say the benefit, because in some of the books of Western scholars, they say that they point out benefits to rearing and having children with such challenges. One of the things that's mentioned, they said, well, you have a community to help you. You have family who come in, who help and support those parents. So that parent and that family is not alone. And this is something that we can definitely learn and inquire within our own communities, that it will take a community to help and to assist with the upbringing of this child, of this member of the community that may have these challenges. And that assistance has to be Again, following those four things that we mentioned before, it has to be gradual, it has to be stable, it has to be continuous, and it has to be cumulative, that we look at their development and their rushd in this way. Within Islamic texts, what we find the benefit of for such children and raising such children and making that next generation, even if they have physical challenges or if they have mental or learning challenges or disabilities, to making them feel like as a part of the community. And even if they're on that extreme spectrum of disability, I would say that there's a beautiful aspect that the Quran also mentions to us, and we know from the riwayat of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdal salatu wasalam, that children who may not have the capacity to take on responsibility, meaning that they have no taklif. They cannot comprehend the idea and the concept of prayer, of salat, of fasting, of making the hajj, or any of the other duties and responsibilities. But we know that these are children of paradise. And as you are taking care of these children of paradise in this world, they will be taking care of you in the next world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, so chapter 56 of the Quran, particularly verse 17, but we'll read verse 17 to verse 19, speaks about these children. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, يَتُوفُ عَلَيْهِمْ وِلْدَانٌ مُخَلَّدُونَ بِأَكْوَابٍ وَأَبَارِيكَ وَكَأْسٍ مِّن مَّعِينٍ لَا يُصَدَّعُونَ عَنْهَا وَلَا يُنزِفُونَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states that in paradise, that there will be wildan, there will be children who will circle around the people of paradise, these youth of paradise, and they will be carrying the goblets and pitchers of cups of the liquid, the drinks from the rivers of paradise, and those drinks from the rivers that they will be carrying around would not cause headaches, or nor would it increase intoxication. When the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was asked about these wildan and mukhallidun, that who are these children, these eternal and everlasting children? So the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he responded that these are the children who lived in this world and they had no taklif. In other words, he says they had no good deeds that they can be rewarded by, nor did they have any bad deeds that they could be held responsible for. It says these are the children of paradise. These are the ones who will be serving you in the next world. And so if they are in this world and we are at their service, to know that they will be at our service in the hereafter. So in this state of returning, or the state of disability, I want to give this last point. It is not something that one should be ashamed of. It should not be something that we are turning such individuals away from our communities, but rather embracing them and accepting them into the community. Of course, with the understanding that the environment we create for them has to be one that is stable. And we look upon their development as a cumulative development. Perhaps not reaching those milestones that we mentioned before, but nonetheless looking at their overall development, their understanding that they are part of the Muslim community, part of this community of Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because those children who are in that particular state, it may happen to even ourselves in our elderly age, that we reach a point where we are challenged physically and even challenged mentally. Alhamdulillah, that in our prime we may be able to reason and think well and do things on our own, but there may come a time that we are not able to do this. A person may after a life of having taklif, may come into Alzheimer's, and not able to function. Maybe develop dementia, and it's not able to understand what they were able to understand before. Or their physical body is not the same as what it was before. So they cannot do things that they were doing before. All of this is a part of our tests in this world. And if we are folks who are capable now, but we're not capable at that time, again, our concept of rushd, or our concept of development, our tarbiyah, it takes on a whole different meaning. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He points towards this in Surah An-Nahl, so chapter 16, verse 70, where He says, وَمِنْكُمْ مَن يُرَدُّ إِلَىٰ أَرْضِ لِلْعُمَرِ لِكَيْ لَا يَعْلَمَ بَعْدَ عِلْمٍ شَيْئًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states that, and from among you, there are those who will be returned to the most basic stage of life, where you do not comprehend things after the fact that you used to be able to comprehend things. So this idea and concept of disability is not one that we should shun and we should look down upon, but rather accept and learn how to respond to those challenges and disabilities with regards to rearing and developing, cultivating and teaching our next generation, or responding to it in the appropriate way as our elderly generation is preparing to return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're in a state where physically they're not able to do what they used to do before. Mentally they're not able to do what they were able to do before. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to guide us by the wisdom of the Quran and by the wisdom of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhim afsalatu wasalam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our sins, to cover our shortcomings, to grant us our needs, to have mercy upon our deceased ones, to cure those who are ill among our friends and family members. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of Imam Zaman, make us among his helpers, his companions, and those who sacrifice their lives for him. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma ighfir dhunubana wastur ayubana waqdi hawaijana washfi maradana warham amwatana wa'ajjal faraj mawlana sahib al-asr wa zaban waj'alna min a'wanihi wa ansarihi wal mustashirin bayna yaday wa tahti liwa'i bihaqqi Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin. Allahumma salli Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.